I know we have a small, I know we have a small group, but do you want questions like as people have them? Do you want to do them at the end? How are you more comfortable?
Yeah, so really, I mean, I don't have very many slides. I've only got about 15 slides. So I really hope that the slides are really just kind of a jumping off point for discussion. So I
Okay,
really would like just to ask questions, talk about their perspectives and things like that as we go along. So, and that's kind of just how I had hoped that this would go and let people just really discuss back and forth because I'm really interested in hearing the public health perspective from it as well as, because most of my perspective comes from the biodefense side. So it'll be interesting to hear both sides.
great. And what I will do is I'll also keep the chat up so that way if somebody has a question and you don't see it, I can kind of butt in. All right. Well,
Okay.
it's 8:05. He'll log in when he gets here. So, I just would like to welcome everybody to our December Public Health Preparedness webinar. I'm always excited because we always have really great speakers for these, and I've been so grateful to have as many amazing people as we do. But tonight I am extra excited because we have somebody from the Penn State family who's going to be speaking. So, before I turn it over to her, I just want to make a couple really quick announcements. Uh, One is since we are going into the holiday season and the semester break, we're going to be taking a break from webinars in January, and then we are going to have our first one in the spring in February, and the actual date for that is going to be February 7th. And right now, I've got a tentative speaker for that one, and it's kind of going to be a unique topic. So there will be more information on that one coming. But again, going to be really excited about that one. My other announcement is that one of my other announcements are we hope to be kicking off our IAEM club for anyone who's interested in emergency managers or emergency management. We took a little bit of a break because of the holidays and the way the meeting dates were falling. So we hope to pick that back up in the spring. If you are interested in emergency management, please you can let me know. I can put my email address in the chat and we can add you to the roster. And also, if you are interested in we are really trying to establish ourselves as a formal chapter of a student chapter of IAEM, and we need some volunteers to have office positions. Truthfully, what we've been doing so far has been pretty low key, so that doesn't really mean anything except for you're signing your name to a piece of paper. We're just having monthly meetings with guest speakers, so it's really no lift. But it would be a great help if we had some volunteers, so that way we could get that the formal paperwork done both on the Penn State side and the IAEM side, and we can be official. The other final announcement that I'd like to make is in spring 2024, I am going to be teaching an elective. It's PHP 810, and it's called Non-Medical Obstacles Impacting Public Health Responses. And it kind of takes a step back from all of the traditional things that you're thinking about with public health responses, like vaccine development and all that kind of stuff. And it looks more at things like the logistics of getting the vaccines from the lab to the people, the security concerns. Like a polio vaccine is not helpful if the vaccination teams get blown up before they get to administer it. Um, it looks at things like communication differences, well, communication problems and cultural differences. So it looks at all of the things that you need to have in place in order to make those medical and biological interventions work. So it's a great topic that I did it for my dissertation, and I've taught this class a number of times since then. And we've got some really great discussions in there. So if you're interested in those kind of things, it would be great to have you in the class. So I have the flyer on LinkedIn. If you've got any questions, you can reach out to me. Again, emails in the chat. And hopefully I will also be getting the flyer out through some different email channels. So you will find it there if you would like any more information. So now I'm done talking. So you can actually get to listen to the person that you came to see tonight. So I am very excited to introduce Amanda Clase, who is she works at the Applied Research Lab here at Penn State, And she's got her PhD in microbiome and immunology, and she's got a graduate certificate in public health preparedness and surveillance. And she spent more than 15 years developing, executing, and leading threat surveillance programs for national security agencies. As I mentioned, she's at the ARL at Penn State, and she leverages extensive cross-discipline collaborations across Penn State faculty, where she's focused on bridging the intersection of national security and global public health security. Her primary focus is on translocational science and technology innovation in areas such as biosurveillance, diagnostics, and sensing, threat discovery, leveraging, wow, I apologize, leveraging AI and learning tools and bioforensics. Before she came to the ARL, she led the research and development, test and evaluation, and operational mission of the Life Sciences program at the Defense Intelligence Agency. As the program manager and the lead scientific technical advisor, her contributions advanced the state-of-the-art in-field deployable bio-threat agent detection and characterization and enhanced collaboration across national security agencies. She routinely represented DIA equities and provided technical advice to Congress, ODNI, and other defense and intel organizations. So her background includes such diverse topics as Cyberni collection and exploitation, MCM development of lab methods and protocols and instrumentation, bioinformatics and microbial forensics, and infectious disease surveillance and outbreak preparedness. So Dr. Clase, thank you so much for giving us time on your Wednesday evening, and I would love to hear what you have to say about AI tonight.
Great. Thanks, Jen. I really appreciate the invitation. This ought to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. So as I was saying earlier, I have a few slides that I'm going to share with you now. But really, these are just a jumping off point. I really am looking forward to some discussions. So please don't hold your questions, ask questions as we go. I'd love to hear your comments and your opinions on some of these topics. I'm going to talk at a fairly high level, but we can certainly drill down into any of the topics that you're interested in or need information from. So let's go ahead and get going here. All right. All right. So again, as Jen said, I am from the Applied Research Laboratory here at Penn State. And wasn't sure who in the audience was really familiar with ARL, so I want to give a little bit of introduction of who we are and what we do, just in case you're not familiar with us. So the Applied Laboratory Research here down at the bottom, we are part of Penn State. We are considered one of the research institutes here, along with all of the other research institutes across campus. We are, however, quite a bit different than the rest of Penn State, although we are Penn State proper. We do research just like the rest of you guys, but we are what is called a university affiliated research center for the Department of Defense. And so what that means is we have a very distinct relationship with DoD. All of the research that we do is in support of their mission, and that's across all of the different agencies, all of the different military branches, pretty much anything having to do with the DoD or the intelligence community. We do research to support their mission and to respond to the needs that these entities have. And so that sets us a little bit apart from what Penn State does. We have to be very responsive to those evolving needs that the DoD has. We do have very comprehensive knowledge of their particular needs. So a lot of our faculty members within ARL, we have a number of engineers, we have a number of scientists, but a lot of them actually come from military or like myself, DoD civilian employees that have now come to ARL to apply their expertise and the knowledge of the operational systems within the military, within the Department of Defense and the intelligence community to try and leverage the research that's being done both within ARL, but also across the entire campus of Penn State to mitigate the challenges that our military has. And so just to give a little bit of more information about ARL, so our mission here is really to serve as the center of research excellence for the DoD and at Penn State. And so again, we take the research that's happening within the Penn State community and really apply it to the mission critical science and technology needs that the DoD has. although we do do basic and fundamental research, we can't just do science for the sake of doing science. We have to actually have an application. And so the research that we do, we actually transition that to advanced technology and to the application of the actual operation missions. So the science that we do actually has to have an application in mind when we're actually doing it. And so in addition to that, though, for Penn State, we enhance the education and research service. And so we bring in students into ARL, we allow interns and that type of thing to actually work through the research that we do at ARL to actually get a taste of what it's like in DoD service and working for this mission that they have. And so it gives supports the educational mission of Penn State as well as the DoD's mission for research and technology. We do have locations all over the place. Our main lab is on University Park, which is where I am, but we have offices spread all over the country, even now in Hawaii, a couple others that aren't actually listed on here. Now, traditionally, ARL we've been in service since 1945, and traditionally the mission for ARL has been mostly submarines and torpedoes, underwater warfare, and things like that. And so about 4 years ago, I came here and with the express mission to actually build a biodefense program. And so this is actually a very new venture for ARL. Not really gotten to the bio side of things. They've done a few projects here and there that have been, when the need has come up from our Navy sponsor or other DoD sponsors, but they've never had a distinct biological program. And so 4 years ago, I came on board to actually build the program here. Now, as Jen said earlier, prior to coming here, I was from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I led the development of a mobile deployable laboratory that was designed for the identification and characterization of biological threat agents that our military members may be subjected to, either intentionally or through natural, outbreaks, things like that. And so one of the problems that I had there, however, with our research budget was very limited for the basic and the applied, the very early research and development systems. And so I really had to leverage all of the off-the-shelf types of tools and instruments and things like that to do the mission that I was trying to do, which all those are very good. They're not always designed for being used in very austere environments, in very dirty environments and things like that. And so I was often really frustrated by the lack of the ability to actually do my own research and development to apply the technologies to the need that I specifically had for my operations. And so the other thing that I realized, though, was that, there's a lot of medical and healthcare, there's a lot of money in research and development for that side of biological R&D. And, the funding for medical research is significantly higher than the types of research that I had available to myself. And so I wanted to be able to actually leverage all of that great research that was going on in the medical communities and the public health fields and actually apply that to the biodefense realm, because this basic science is basically the same. Biology is biology, no matter what you're looking at. And so when I came here to Penn State, I wanted to actually try to bridge that gap, so to speak, between the R&D development and the all of the information that was available to the public health side and the medical community, and actually start to apply that to the national security problems that we were facing. And so from this slide, this is a little bit of an older slide, but you can see that there's really a kind of an intersection between the information and the research that goes on for global health security and national security. So things like sensors and detectors, these are the science that develops these is, the same regardless of whether you're trying to form a point of care, detection assay for a rural healthcare situation, versus a military person going out into an austere environment and trying to identify a biological threat agent that they may have been exposed to. And so all of that information is actually the same regardless of what the application is. And so you can see there's several of these here, that are very, very common across both. Any of the diagnostics, the assay development is certainly applicable to both situations. Sample collection and transport, again, we're in an austere environment. That's very, very similar to some of the medical interventions that you're looking at in either rural areas or lower income countries where they may not have significant healthcare infrastructure and things like that. And so it's really trying to leverage the shared information and the shared technology across both applications is what we're trying to do here. Now, as you can see, getting into more of the artificial intelligence that we wanted to talk about, a lot of this information is very data heavy. The biosecurity information sharing across agencies, the analytics of all of these databases that we have accumulated, regardless of what, where they've come from, all of this information has to get sorted and filtered and analyzed and have some knowledge brought from it. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about, some more of these in a little bit more depth, but, you can imagine that a lot of these, areas that have a variety of applications that we can actually, that we can use them for. And so the other aspect for the security, the biosecurity, the national security side is this over the horizon. And that's the other thing that we had a little bit of difficulty when I was with the government in really understanding what technology is up and coming. When you're reacting to, the global issues of the day, every single day, it's really hard to keep your head around all of the advancements and the technologies and the improvements that are going on in the research world. And so being here at Penn State, I can actually see what all the researchers are doing. And then I can actually look and try and look at what the risks of those technologies are, what the emerging technologies might be, and what gaps that we might have still to fill with new technologies. And so any of the technologies that we design and that we develop in the academic community or anywhere else, we also know that our adversaries are developing these same things. And so we need to know what what these can be used for and how we can mitigate any damages that they might bring. And so understanding what research is actually, what the cutting edge research in academia is actually being done helps us determine what the future national security issues are that we need to be aware of and that we need to guard against. And so the biodefense initiative here at ARL is really formed into 4 very, very general topic areas. And we'll talk a little bit about these as we go on into the more general AI discussion. But for example, some of the things that we do here on the cyber bio side are the data analytics. Again, it's all these databases and understanding all of the what all this information means, and using AI to actually get to the root of some of these very complex systems and the information that we're developing, and just really being able to leverage that information to provide good answers for different topics. Cyber biosecurity is a huge issue, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in depth a little bit later. But that's a very big issue for national security, as well as just our public health. The ability to protect the manufacture and development of drugs and new medical countermeasures, the development and the design of new drugs and vaccines. The biomaterials and sensors on the bottom left-hand side, this is a new area for me, and that is the actual development of novel materials that have interesting properties. And I'll talk a little bit about that, one of the projects that we're actually doing here at ARL. One of the things that I think that public health is also very interested in, we talk a lot about virus X, the ones that we don't know what's out there. And so developing sensors that can actually identify a potential threat without knowing what that threat is. So for example, now we have, PCR, but you actually have to understand what virus threat you're looking for before you can develop a PCR assay. So one of the things that we're looking at here is trying to develop a pathogen agnostic sensor. And so something that can actually to identify a potential threat without really having pre-knowledge of what that threat might be. Warfighter health and preparedness is another area I think that a lot of you all would be interested in, because that's really where we have a lot of overlap with the public health. Obviously, any medical conditions that the public has, our military members are also going to be struggling with. Of course, they have some additional ones. We are looking at mental health issues such as PTSD, very field triage in mass casualty situations, or even just, any type of wartime injuries, things that where you may not have the medical infrastructure right away at your fingertips to actually help these folks. So anything that we can do to enable quick first aid or triage of injuries on the field to get these folks a little bit more time so that they have a better chance of survival before they get to an actual hospital infrastructure where they can get the help that they need. Now, the last one is the agricultural biosecurity. And again, I'll talk about this a little bit further as well. This is a very underserved area. Unfortunately, it's also a very soft target. We have our food security system is very fragile. I think we saw that recently with, avian influenza and the cost of eggs and things like that as we went across the pandemic that we had for avian influenza this year. Those are things that can be vulnerabilities that can be used by our adversaries as well. And so that is a huge national threat that a lot of people unfortunately aren't looking at as deeply as probably should. So that's actually one of the things that I'm really interested in pursuing here at Penn State, because honestly, it's one of the things that keeps me up at night among all of these. So just a couple of examples of the types of things that we're doing here at ARL, and then I'm going to go into get into more of a general discussion on artificial intelligence and some of the potential areas where AI is very, very beneficial, but also produces some potential vulnerabilities that we might want to think about as well. So data analysis and visualization is, as I'm talking about, is a huge area for bio threat. There's tons of databases out there for different biological topics that, all need to be evaluated. So this is just one example of one of the algorithms that was developed here at ARL. The top left picture there is of an interactive website that we developed called COVID Explorer. And we put this together, our faculty put this together very early on during COVID, when we were getting just, there were thousands of publications being done all the time. Some of them were being peer reviewed, some of them were not, some of them were good, some of them were not as good. And so this was an artificial intelligence application, a machine learning tool that went through all of the COVID publications that were being published online anywhere, accumulated them, and provided a lot of interactive tools that would allow researchers to really identify which papers were the ones that they needed to read, which ones were well written, which ones had actual well-documented science, which ones were peer reviewed. There were a number of different tools on here that you could identify which scientists were doing which topics. And so if you were looking for a particular collaborator, you could easily find those scientists that were working on that particular topic. If you had particular questions in mind, you could very easily sort and sift through this thousands of publications to find the papers that were very critical to the topic that you were very interested in. And so that was actually just a tool that would allow a much more efficient method for identifying, the publications that might be of most interest to a particular researcher. Moving over to the right-hand side is some of the modeling and simulation things that we are working on. And so again, this is taking all of these data points and really trying to evaluate these very, very complex systems. So in this example I've got is a supply chain diagram. And so this is, being able to identify for the supply chain that where the vulnerability points are, do simulations of either a breakdown of the supply chain or attack on the supply chain, and really identifying what those vulnerabilities are, where the gaps are, what we need to do to enhance the protection of those supply chains, or mitigate the supply chains to prevent any damage or disruption to that during an event. So for example, we saw it very clearly in COVID when there were medical supplies and critical reagents, things like that, that just weren't getting out of China or out of other countries and getting to where they needed to be. And so simulating that and modeling those very complex cycles is important to really identify where the vulnerabilities are and how we can mitigate those vulnerabilities. In the bottom left-hand side, we have another project that we're actually working on, biological protection device. And this is specifically for the military. And it's a device that actually captures a virus or a bacteria so that you can actually not destroy that sample, but you can then take it back to a laboratory for additional characterization. However, on the spot, you can use Raman spectroscopy to actually identify, or at least get a quick identification of what that threat is. And so again, it's a very easy, user-friendly method, because the folks that are using these types of devices aren't typically technically savvy. They're not scientists, they're not biologists, so they don't know exactly what they're looking for. So they need a device that will actually tell them yes or no, this is something that you need to be concerned about, or yes or no, this is something that you've been exposed to. And then on the last side too, the biomaterials, again, I was talking a little bit earlier about the development of novel biomaterials, and we're using synthetic biology actually to look at different proteins and actually tailor the genetic sequence of those proteins so that they will then express a particular function that we're interested in, whether that's a mechanical strength, whether that is thermal conductivity or insulating properties, color changing properties, all of these different properties. And we can do that using artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually look at how these proteins interact with each other and what their genetic sequence and their amino acid sequence can actually be manipulated to tailor those properties that they might normally have. So now just switching gears a little bit further away from ARL and just really to AI in general. And AI is huge. We see it in our everyday life. Netflix knows which movies you like to watch, and Amazon knows exactly what to show you as a gift you might want to buy for somebody, because people have tracked and AI has tracked all of your search requirements and all of the things that you've looked at before, movies that you've watched before. And so AI, we see AI in our daily lives all the time. And there's such a broad topic. But I really wanted to focus on two places in particular where AI has a huge advantage and can really enhance our daily lives, but also has some real serious threats that it may be posing as well. And I want to look at both sides of those for each of these topics. And the first one is the AI in healthcare. And then the second one I'll get to a little bit later is the AI in agriculture. And so in healthcare, one of the main drivers or the main topics for artificial intelligence and machine learning and really deep learning techniques is this idea of precision medicine or personalized medicine. And this is a situation in which what we're trying to do is identify healthcare interventions that are tailored to either you as a specific individual or a group of people who have similar attributes. And so the interventions, they may take information from anything from your genetic sequence to your age, gender, race, all of these different things, and really take into account all of those to tailor the health intervention directly for you. Now, in order to do that, the accumulation of knowledge about you has to be vast. And so we're talking about next generation sequencing. We're talking about proteomic or metabolomic types of surveys, all of your electronic health records, your vaccination history, your disease history, all of these other things about you. Even the things that we wear all the time, health, these such as, things, glucose monitors that you wear all the time for diabetes or for other medical issues that you might have. All of those go into these apps, and all of this information is collected about you, and all of this can be used then to really look at you as an entire individual and really tailor these healthcare interventions to really look at to be specific to you. And so it's no longer, it's no longer this, one drug for everybody that has, a fever or whatever it is. It's really looking at exactly what it is that makes you you. And so, this is actually a really amazing, possibility in that you're going to not only reduce cost because you may, if you can catch a disease early, it can prevent hospitalizations, it can reduce doctor's visits, things like that. If you have specific genetic mutations, you can be aware of these ahead of time. And so you can take precautions that may change the outcome of your health status. And so we're really looking at changing the paradigm of medicine from a reactionary basis of reacting to a disease or a condition to really a preventative type of focus. And so precision medicine is really important in order to maintain our health and welfare. But it does take a lot of information, and there's a lot of very complex systems that need to go into this to actually develop something that is tailored specifically to you. The other area in healthcare that is really, really advancing with AI and machine learning is the design and development of drugs. Now, all are probably very aware that drugs design and development is an extremely long process. It's very, very costly. It takes a lot of effort, and it's oftentimes there's a lot of failures within that. So it can take up to 10 years or more from the time you actually target a particular molecule to the time it actually gets through FDA approval and marketing. And, quite honestly, most of the candidates that are brought into the research and development pipeline fail before they get, anywhere close to the regulatory process. And that's a huge financial impact to the companies that are trying to produce these, but it's also a huge impact to the public health. We're not getting the medicines that we need because the process is very, very long. There are a lot of failures throughout, and also the regulatory process is very, very complex. And so there's so much that goes into, and so much regulation and requirements that go into the process that has to be followed from the very, very beginning. And so AI is being applied to a lot of these different steps, and it's really creating the opportunity to reduce the cost, reduce the time, and reduce the number of failures. We can actually use artificial intelligence and machine learning to look at these networks of biological systems to see how things are interacting in silico instead of having to study that in vivo, reducing the time and the cost of that step. The data mining, so understanding from all of these chemical databases what these chemicals do and what their attributes are, and then applying that to novel diseases and trying to look for areas that we can repurpose drugs that are already in use and have already been approved, reducing again those steps until we get to approval and market. artificial intelligence has been used in a variety of ways for the actual design and development of the drug itself. So analysis of the biological action of a compound, the transcriptional signaling of that compound, comparing the drugs to other drugs of similar classes and things like that. And all of this information is contained in databases over, a number of different databases across vast areas and different topics. And all of this information is available, but without AI, we can't actually identify patterns and potential uses for some of these drugs.
Amanda, I have a quick question.
Sure.
While speeding up the whole process would obviously be great because it would get drugs to people who need them faster, but like what is too fast do you think when it comes to like people's perception so we don't end up with the same thing that happened with the COVID vaccine?
Right. I mean, I think that there's a lot of aspects to that. So, there's certainly the scientific aspect of that, and that is we need to make sure that the information that we have is accurate. And this is one of the vulnerabilities that we have using AI, is because we do start to become reliant on it. And there does have to be a method for ensuring that the data that we have is accurate, so that we can ensure the safety. We can ensure, when we're talking about biological interactions with drugs, and immunological interactions of drugs, we need to verify that the information that we have, that, AI can actually be this black box that people don't really understand what goes on in those algorithms. And so it's really up to the folks that are designing these algorithms to be able to explain exactly what's going on, and so that we can have trust in the data that we're getting out. And so there's that piece of it. The other piece of it as well is more of a social aspect to that. And we saw this a lot with, a lot of the folks that had, hesitancy about the COVID vaccine. They didn't understand that process, the platform that was being used, had actually been researched for more than a decade. The research was there, and it's an unfortunate and kind of an off topic, but the lack of scientific knowledge in the general public to understand that, this is actually going on, and that the research was actually in fact there, and that this wasn't something that was rushed to market like a lot of people thought. And so there's a lot of different components to that. But I think, for the focus of this conversation, it's really, even as scientists, we have to be able to trust our data. And if one of the issues that I've seen with AI is, you have a lot of folks that are very, very savvy in developing these algorithms and understanding machine learning and understanding computers and that type of thing, who are not necessarily biologists. And at the same time, you have biologists who understand the biological processes, and they understand drug interactions and things like that, but they don't necessarily understand the cyber aspect of it, the analytical aspect. And so it's really, one of the things that, I was thinking about this when I was developing this presentation was, what kind of workforce do we need to start to try and devise and start to teach folks? And that is that crossover of understanding both sides of that and being able to explain, your expertise, whether that's biology, explaining that to a computer scientist, or a computer scientist being able to explain their algorithm to a biologist in a language that we can all understand, and actually have trust in that process, and understand that the data that we have is actually accurate. So the other side.
JD, did you have a oh sorry, JD, did you have
Go
a
ahead.
question? I thought you unmuted for a second.
I did. Oh, wait.
Okay.
No, please go ahead.
No, not
Okay.
really. Not yet.
Okay. So the other aspect of healthcare that AI has really played a large part in is the human experience, the patient experience. And so, and this is another area, and we think about it a little bit, but maybe not as much as we should. But it's been very beneficial in, for example, we saw again, COVID was a huge paradigm shift for a lot of us. And although, those of us in public health knew it was coming at some point, it was still unfortunately a surprise to a lot of people. But, the artificial intelligence and the machine learning really kind of took off in that, and was applied in that circumstance with a lot of the telehealth aspects, being able to actually, have a patient doctor interaction without having to come to a clinic where you're going to either be exposed to or maybe even spread, disease even further. And so telehealth and telemonitoring became very, very big. It's continuing to expand since then. But also patient education, understanding, and this, this can be in a variety of ways, but it kind of goes back to your question earlier, Jen, and that is trying to educate the patients on, how these things are being done, how the research is being done, and what this actually means to them. And so developing training platforms or, other types of training methods to educate patients on their own healthcare and their own, their health needs is very important. And we can do a lot with that with artificial intelligence and virtual reality training platforms and things like that. The other aspect of education is actually for the doctors. And so there's a lot of virtual reality types of training platforms that are being developed that can actually help doctors learn new techniques, new methods, without having to, put them in a patient situation until they have that method under their control and under their, really have a good, solid working knowledge of it. A lot of us have these smartwatches and these wearable technologies. Those are obviously, big areas for artificial intelligence that have improved, the health outcome for a lot of people. Continuous glucose monitoring, like I mentioned earlier, really allows you to keep track of what your status is, so that you can preemptively, help yourself in changing your diet or changing your medication schedule, instead of just waiting until a critical event occurs. The other aspect, we talked about it a little bit earlier with the precision medicine, are electronic health records. Being able to have your entire health record at a moment's notice is very, very critical to ensure that you get the right medical care and that type of thing. And we're going to talk a little bit in a few more slides of how the threat, there are vulnerabilities with all of this technology as well.
I just
So
put
the other
two things in the chat that you can read later, but talking about virtual reality and healthcare, Penn State just had a huge victory with the 1-year anniversary of the virtual ICU service. And as I put in the chat, one of the women who went through our program is very actively involved in that. So the anniversary story was just posted today, I believe. And then I also posted a story from I think it was October, which kind of gives a little bit more background at the earlier stages of it. So if you want to save those two links and read them later, it's a really interesting and also very successful rollout of this program.
Yeah, that was great.
A use case on how you're using AI in training, like especially for patients? I mean, in what way is AI useful in the training?
So it's more of it's the virtual and augmented reality, really, that it, and I think that, you were talking earlier about your the game theory and things like that. We've found that people learn better if they are playing games, if it's fun, right? If education is fun, they learn it and they retain it much better. And so actually developing scenarios, either virtual or augmented reality scenarios where people can actually play a game and learn about either their healthcare or how science is done, those types of things can really enhance versus a news story of how the vaccine was developed or something like that. And so it's those types of game theory and tools and resources that can actually help people understand. Some of the things that we've looked at ARL are, they're more obviously for the military customer, but things like developing a virtual reality mass casualty situation, or being able to train a soldier on how to act and react when they are in a biological release, a biological threat agent release, or something like that, where you can actually put them into very realistic scenarios without actually putting them in danger. And that was actually, when I was at DIA, one of the problems that we had was training our soldiers. First of all, you have to, when it's something, a topic that they're not familiar with. So if you take a soldier who's used to, being on the front lines and fighting, and then they have to deal with, say, a biological event or a chemical release or something like that, that's a foreign topic to them. And so it takes multiple rounds of training to get them to understand how to properly react. How do they put on their PPE properly? How do they decontaminate themselves properly? How do they protect themselves and their teammates? And how do they collect the samples that they need to collect? All of those things are, are very critical steps that they need to learn, and they need to be able to really just, they don't want to have to think about it. They want to have to just have that muscle memory to do that. And that's a very expensive process to do if you do it live. And it's a very dangerous process to do if you do it live. Plus, you can't necessarily do it very realistically, because you can't intentionally expose people to dangerous pathogens and toxins. And so by developing these virtual reality platforms, you can have a situation in which you have a chemical release or a biological release, and they have to go through all of these motions, and they can do it over and over again at a very efficiently cost platform, and also just repeat it as many times as the individual needs, and not have to, have an entire live class for a large group of people. They can do it individually. They can do it over and over again as many times as they need to. And so it's really that, it's introducing people to foreign topics that they aren't normally introduced to, in a safe but very realistic manner. Does that answer your question? Okay. So moving on again to the next topic that I wanted to talk about, and the one that's a little bit concerning to me, is AI in agriculture. And so it's been a huge benefit to agriculture. We have methods and tools for looking at very complex interactions, nutrient cycles between livestock and crops and soil and environment. We have a constantly changing climate. We have climate change that's happening across the globe. All of these things are changing and making agriculture more difficult and less sustainable at this point. And so by understanding these different processes and taking all of this data that we have for different nutrient cycles, different environmental and weather cycles, biological cycles within livestock or within crops and things like that, whether there are insect pests or infectious disease for the plants and the livestock, and taking all of these factors into account, and using these algorithms to actually identify, again, the vulnerabilities, the changes that are taking place. We can do simulations to understand how a change in a critical temperature or a critical nutrient loss or additional rain or drought or heat stress will affect the entire cycle, so that we can mitigate and make changes to our agricultural practices, to create a more sustainable system. As the climate continues to change, and as the ability to actually farm in certain areas changes or is reduced, then our food security is reduced. And we need to understand how these cycles exist. And we can't do that very easily just through, humans looking at the information that's out there. There's just too much of it. And so we need these deep learning techniques and these machine learning techniques to really look at all these different layers of information and put them together and find these patterns and find the vulnerabilities and the different pinch points where, you know, that may become a problem at some point, and so that we can actually start to try and mitigate those. And some of those mitigations also may have you know, AI attributes to them. So for example, the development of novel crop species that may be more stress resistant or more drought tolerant. We're using genetic engineering, which is strongly influenced with artificial intelligence and machine learning, to actually develop new plant species or new variants of crop species that will do better in these areas that are now, you know, under threat because of climate change or other, you know, environmental factors. And by doing this, we're creating a more manageable agricultural cycle that really protects our food security and our sustainability, along with the ecological sustainability that's required for you know, continued land use in agriculture for both, you know, crops and livestock. And so some of the other ways that, you know, it's being done in agriculture is through censoring. You know, this is just a more discrete example of how agriculture is using AI, and that's through these sensors and these robotics. And it's making agriculture, again, it's much more efficient, it's less costly, it's less time consuming. You're eliminating some of the human error in using autonomous sensors to actually identify areas of stress in crops or infectious disease in animals. And we can do that at a, you know, a very global level, from with satellite-based sensors down to even individual crops with, you know, your drones and things like that that are actually surveying, you know, large areas that a human can't actually do in as efficient a time, and be able to actually look at sensors, different sensors. And some of these sensors that we're actually looking at even surpass, you know, human ability. And so we're looking at things like, you know, ultraviolet changes in plants and things like that to show heat stress and other types of, you know, stress responses that plants might have. And so the sensors can actually identify these incidents or these critical changes before a human can actually see them, even on the ground. And so it really makes agriculture much more efficient, and it allows for the ability to produce more food with less effort and less space. And so it's much more efficient, and again, it just enhances our food security. You know, the development of smart farms that we have now, where we are using robotics to very distinctly apply herbicides or pesticides only where they're needed, instead of spraying the entire crop that may not actually need that same amount of fertilizer or that same amount of pesticide. And so again, it's a much more efficient method, and it's much more sustainable in the long run. So now, as I said, though, these are the areas that are, you know, actually AI is very beneficial, but it also creates a lot of potential for vulnerabilities and for damages. And so this is, you know, one of the things that I'm very concerned about, especially with this precision medicine, is that, you know, the same techniques that we're using to look at an individual's genetic makeup or their, you know, their metabolic profile or whatever information that we're getting, those same techniques, that same information could also be used to produce a pathogen or some other, you know, effect that is directly targeted to a specific group of people based on, say, a genetic mutation or genetic lineage. And so that information is out there in the techniques to, whether you're producing a beneficial medical countermeasure or you're producing a you know, a nefarious or a harmful product, the techniques are the same, and it's really just the application of it. And that's one of the things that is really kind of scary with personalized medicine, is that individuals or individual groups could be targeted if that were of interest to our adversaries. Genetic engineering, again, same types of thing. We can create novel plant species and are more resistant to stress and produce more food, but we can also develop novel pathogens and toxins that are either applicable to particular people, or can evade our current detection systems, or can evade our current medical countermeasures and vaccines. One of the big issues is the laboratory automation. And although this does create a much more efficient method, it's much more time saving. And if, for example, all of your machines are automated for their temperature controls, or if you have a critical pH for a growth process for one of your drug development processes, all of those are automated so that it takes away human error, and it keeps very meticulous records on what's going on. However, all of those are actually also very vulnerable to hacking and to invasion by external sources. And so this is something we actually did just last year. I was part of a tabletop exercise that included this exact scenario for biosecurity, in that a startup vaccine development company was targeted by hackers, and it was their automation system that really took down the entire company. And within the first day of playing this game, really just destroyed the company beyond repair. Because even if you don't actually insert, a nefarious type of information or act, just the threat of that reduces completely the trust in your data. It eliminates, it really destroys the schedule that you were on for FDA regulatory processes. If they don't trust the data that you're producing, then you're certainly not going to get your product through FDA regulation. And so even just the threat of, somebody saying, hey, we've hacked your system and we've messed with your data, can completely destroy and shut down the company. And not only is that obviously very detrimental to that particular company, but if that company was, for example, the company that was producing the COVID vaccine in the very beginning, that would have cost the public health, system extensively. It would have been very, very detrimental if we had not been able to get that product through regulation and onto the market. And so it was an interesting, scenario that we did, and it was really eye-opening to see how quickly a simple attack by just a small group of hackers could really impact not only that company but the entire development of a medical countermeasure for something. The other aspect to that too is that all of our health information now is digitized, and so privacy issues are huge. And even in the development of precision or personalized medicine, we have to be able to take into account the privacy of the patient's information. All that information is out there, and although we're trying to use it for good purposes and for very beneficial, helpful purposes, it's available. The other aspect of it is, for example, your genetic information. Understanding a lot of your genetic predisposition to certain, illnesses or diseases may be great for allowing you to get tested early and to get treatment early, but we have to be very careful that we don't use that information against someone. So for example, say somebody has a genetic predisposition to alcoholism or something like that. That doesn't mean that they're actually going to do that. And doesn't mean that they're going to become an alcoholic. They just have the predisposition genetically to it. We can't preemptively say, I'm not going to hire this person for a job because he has this, genetic predisposition. And so there's a lot of ethical issues, obviously, surrounding a lot of this digitized information as well, that we need to really, really be careful of and to think about as we move forward with a lot of the ways that we're using automation and artificial intelligence to use this information that's very personal in nature. And then the threats to the agriculture is another area. Like I said, our agricultural system and the agricultural system across the globe is quite honestly a very soft target for our adversaries. It's not, we don't have very significant biological controls. I mean, there certainly are a lot of them. However, it's not very difficult to walk onto somebody's, farmland, especially when you're talking about these mega farms that are thousands and thousands of acres that are not, routinely monitored. And so agriculture is actually a really big target that has been unfortunately underserved in the national security realm. That needs to be, a lot of more research and needs to be done in this area. But you can imagine if, somebody were to, fly a drone over a crop and release something toxic or infectious, even worse, that would destroy that crop and maybe even spread to neighboring farms and things like that. So you have destruction of food supplies, you have, again, introduction of either novel infectious diseases that we may not have any medical countermeasures for. All of these different problems that, come with these, the use of these drones and these robotic systems in agriculture. Anything that touches our food supply is going to cause huge public panic. If there's any indication that there's a disease or lack of food or food scarcity, that's a huge impact on the public, and that's going to be something that is very drastically, it's going to be a drastic change if anything like that were to happen. The economic of it, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but our GDP is hugely affected by our agriculture, as are many other countries. And so you destroy that food supply or that that agricultural ability of different countries and reduce trust in those countries or in their agricultural products, then the economic devastation globally would be phenomenal. So there's, again, this is a topic that really does concern me quite a bit. I think that AI is hugely advantageous, but I think there's a lot of areas that we really need to be careful and look at the possible vulnerabilities that it's introducing into some of these processes that we have. So that's the last slide that I have. So I wanted to, open it up for discussion. If you wanted to dive down into any of these topics a little bit further, I'm happy to do so. Any questions or comments, concerns?
So, in terms of avoiding data poisoning in the AI models, in your work, what steps have you taken to help mitigate that kind of issue?
So, there's a lot of different ways that you can mitigate that. I mean, obviously there's physical security, making sure that your systems are safe and monitored and that type of thing. But a lot of it has to do with understanding, where are those vulnerabilities? And so are there vulnerabilities? So one of the things that you mentioned, you had gotten your models offline from online that you were trying to use. Where do those models come from, and understanding that. And so it's the data sharing is a big component of it, in that you have to understand who's developing those algorithms and what those safety checks and monitors and security protocols are in their algorithm before you apply it to your data. It's the being able to verify your data from one day to the next. And so one of the things that we discussed during this tabletop exercise that I was describing is that, so one of the scenarios was that the hackers had stated that they had introduced bad data into the laboratory system, the laboratory notebook system. And so it was up to the company then to actually figure out how to go back and verify, to match the data from day X, where they said they had done this thing, to data previous to that, before this this attack had happened. And so now that takes a lot of man hours, it takes a lot of money to actually do that. But if you have that backup data, you can actually then verify that the data that you're getting is actually accurate. And so those are the types of things that you can do to try to protect the data that you've got.
So thank you very much for this brief. This was very, very informative, and it was eye-opening with some of the things that you talked about. So I really appreciate this. I have a different type of question, and from the bio that we heard, you come from a molecular and immunological background. You worked at DIA, so you didn't follow a traditional path that people would think of when they think of public health. And this is something I think
Right.
is so important because I have a lot of students that come in and they're like, "Oh, public health, I need to work for the CDC." And I try to explain, we all try to explain that there are so many different career paths and, places like you were at DIA, I'm at the Coast Guard, like places that you don't think to look for these opportunities. So can you talk a little bit about how you got to where you are and like some of the opportunities that really made a difference in your career trajectory?
Sure. I mean, honestly, it was random chance in the very beginning, in that I was pursuing a traditional academic career, in that I did my graduate work in viruses and in neurovirology. So I was interested in viruses that attack the brain, which is where the topic I did my postdoc on as well. And I was at National Institutes of Health at Rocky Mountain Labs in Montana, studying a virus that causes a disease very similar to mad cow disease. And so I was following that very traditional trajectory, and I really just received an offer for a job that was creating medical countermeasures, which sounded very interesting to me, in developing new countermeasures against biological threat agents. And this was at the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. And so it was completely different than what I had actually studied, but it was something that was, I wanted to be able to really make an impact on human health. And developing medical countermeasures is obviously one of those main drivers of that. And so I took the job, and it was really eye-opening for me as well, in that it introduced me to the biothreat space. And traditionally, and this is all pre-COVID, and COVID really changed a lot of things for a lot of people, I think. And so, but talking about before COVID, one of the things I noticed as I got into the biodefense realm is that there was a very distinct separation between biodefense and public health. Even though we're all fighting the same pathogens, but biodefense was very much focused on the bad actor releasing something nasty and causing harm to people, whether it's the military or whether it's in our nation. Whereas public health is looking at the very natural regular outbreaks of disease. There is really no difference between those two things. It doesn't matter where it came from. It's the infection is most likely, in most cases, going to progress the same way, regardless of where it originated from. Fortunately, COVID actually kind of changed that. We saw, and I saw from in going to seminars for the government and the very biodefense focused seminars, I saw that change of a real realization that a natural infection is a very, very serious threat to our national security. COVID took down entire, warships and closed down entire army bases because people got sick. And it was I think it was a real eye opener for a lot of the biodefense arena, that we need to pay attention, and quite honestly, we need to start talking to the public health folks, and vice versa. The public health folks need to know. So, in my job at DIA, our mission was to try and find out what our enemies are doing. Not everybody is a signature of the biodefense, the
BWC?
Thank you. That one. And so there are countries out there that have biological weapons programs still. And so it's, it's from the intelligence community and the DoD, it's, we need to understand what it is that they're doing. If we understand, or if we have some idea of what types of agents that they're working on or may be working on, we can inform the public health and the medical community so that they can start developing countermeasures and detection, kits against those agents, so that we can be more prepared for it. Now, on the
Well,
other,
another thing is that the BWC only has, states that signed it. So
right,
terrorist organizations are a whole
exactly,
another concern. So, you talking
exactly,
about the warships and everything, I mean, that's a really important point about COVID. And a point that I've also made is that from the other perspective, we had a lot of military use, I guess, during COVID. Like we had National Guard members that were at food banks. We had
yep,
coasties helping
yes,
FEMA, supporting vaccination sites. If we had had COVID, like October of 2001, you would not have had all of those extra military bodies
exactly,
able to do that. So FEMA would have been on their own setting up the mass
yes,
vaccination sites. It would not have been Coast Guard members there. And we even had, I think it was in Massachusetts, National Guard members were driving buses, school
yes,
buses, because there were such big shortages.
yeah,
So COVID was a really great example of like how everybody came together in that sense.
right,
But like a Coast Guard person can only be in one place at one time. So
right,
if there's like a Hurricane Katrina or a Deepwater Horizon during an outbreak, that person's not going to be able to be doing that job. They're going to be doing their
exactly,
everyday job. So
yeah,
I mean it's also a national security issue from that standpoint because we can't double tap these people because
right,
it's not physically possible.
right. No, and if they're deployed out, fighting a war somewhere, they can't be here driving buses or helping
Hmm.
FEMA, right? I mean, and so, honestly too, it's if they're out with COVID, they're also not helping, and regardless
Exactly.
of where your day-to-day job is. And so, no, it's, it was really very eye-opening, and which to me, that's the silver lining of COVID, is that we started having a lot of these discussions. And it was interesting. I went to a seminar, again, it was a government in directed seminar, in that there was a lot of discussion of a lot more communication across agencies and across different military branches and things like that. They still weren't talking about talking to the public health community, and it was very, very disappointing to me, because the information is there. It's some of the things that I was concerned about, at DIA was, how if somebody releases an agent, what is the fate of that agent? How long does it last in the environment? How long, how does it spread? Things like that. That's information that a lot of times is available already in the public health domain, because they've studied things like spread of pathogens and how things happen and things like that. And so, but we unfortunately, we don't avail ourselves to the information each different side has. And it's unfortunate. And it's something that, and honestly, using a lot of going back to the AI, it's being able to transfer data is so much easier now, and transfer that information and share that information is so much easier now that we have, some of these tools and techniques using AI. So that even if we don't share the raw data, we can still analyze that data that we have and share those results. And it really provides a much better method for informing all the different parties that need the information for whatever application that they're using it for. And so, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, you talked about the terrorists, but we also have a huge problem with do-it-yourself biologists these days, and some of these kits that, for genetic engineering and things like that are widely available simply online. And so it's a little scary that anybody can, it obviously it still takes some, technical experience or technical expertise, but that's getting less and less. These kits are getting easier and easier to use and to do. And so, you know, keeping this type of information, although we want to teach the general public about science and how this works so they have confidence in it, we also have to guard against giving out, you know, the information that allows people to do things that they're not supposed to be doing with it as well. So it's a balancing act. You know, biology is fundamentally a dual use topic. You know, it can go either way, and it can go badly very quickly, unfortunately.
Sorry, I had to go grab my charger, which is why the change of scenery. So I know that you said in your bio that you have a Saberni background. Is bio, and I know you mentioned things keeping you up at night. Is bio out of those, like, is that really the thing that keeps you up? Or do you think that, like, I mean, I know typically when people talk about WMD, it's like the big
Yeah.
mushroom cloud that everybody worries about. But is it bio that you think is the more dominant? Maybe dominant's not the right word, but the bigger
No,
threat right now?
I know what you mean. It is. I mean, in my mind, it is. You know, so, you know, when you're talking about ChemBio and RadNuke, you know, obviously everybody's concerned about RadNuke. We've been concerned about that for, you know, I don't know, 50 plus 100 years and by now. You know, and we know that people have those weapons. You know, we know those are out there. We know people that are actively trying to get and create those weapons. And, you know, and that's a well-known fact. We know chemical weapons are out there. Well, they used them in Syria when you know, in the last several years. You know, chemical weapons are out there. Bio, you know, obviously I'm biased, but yes, bio scares me more. And that's because it can spread. I'm a virologist by training. You know, that's my thing. And so a virus is, to me, you know, a lot more of a threat, because whether it's from a natural source or even more so from a nefarious source, if somebody can use genetic engineering to design a new virus and release that, you know, unlike a nuclear weapon, that's obvious. You know who has it. You know, you can't develop a nuclear weapon without people knowing about it. You know, the supplies, the infrastructure needed, all of that, that's very obvious. Chemical weapons, you know, a little bit less so. You can use, you know, some of the, you know, just normal everyday chemicals that we see for industrial uses like chlorine, things like that. And so, you know, so there's you have kind of a dual use concern there as well. But neither of those spread. It's a very discreet. If you release a chemical weapon, you're going to hurt a lot of people. You're going to hurt them very quickly, but it's going to be contained for less, for lack of a better word. And that's, you know, it's hard for me to say that because a lot of people can die, and that's a very horrible thing. But a virus, if you can release, you know, you can carry that across, you know, state lines or country lines, and nobody's going to be the wiser. If you have just a tiny little tube is all you need. And that's not true for your chemicals and some of the other things. You know, a lot of times my leadership at DIA would ask me, you know, because obviously something like anthrax is a huge, you know, bio threat. And that really doesn't concern me as much as a virus does, you know, again, because you need a lot of it. It's going to be nasty and it's going to kill a lot of people. But again, it's not going to spread, at least not as easily as, say, a virus does. So for me, you know, one of the other things that I've always said is that Mother Nature is our biggest adversary when it comes to bio. You know, she does a lot of genetic engineering that much better than and much faster than we do. And so that is really, you know, one of the biggest concerns for me is, you know, just the ability of bio to spread so easily and to do so much damage. And then the last point that I wanted to make is what I've said all along is that agriculture is a soft target. We're not watching that as much as we are looking for anthrax in letters or looking for, you know, people doing bad things with, you know, human infectious diseases and things like that. But if you mess with our food system, what are we going to do? That is, you know, public health destruction. That is economic destruction. That is, you know, that's your very life of your food security and the confidence in your food supply, and that's a huge concern that keeps me up at night, quite honestly.
It was interesting your comments on anthrax, because I've said that to people before. Like, you're gonna notice a big crop duster in an area, like, but
Right.
if somebody's walking around with a cough, I mean, that doesn't attract.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe now it attracts some attention, but still, I mean, somebody has a stuffy nose and, oh, I have allergies, and you kind of just brush it off and nobody thinks
Yeah.
anything of it, but it could be so many other things, and especially during flu season, nobody even
Yeah.
thinks twice when they hear people coughing and sneezing.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and
Interesting.
there's like I said, because there's such a small amount needed,
Mm.
and you could just, and I don't really want to get into too many possibilities in an open forum, but there's so many easy ways to disperse that are very, very subtle, and and that's the thing that is the most concerning. Like you said, it doesn't take a big crop duster of something to do a significant amount of damage with a pathogen that will spread human to human.
So it's 9:25. Does anybody else have any questions? I know I've been kind of asking a bunch, so I don't want to monopolize. Um, this is just fascinating. So, and I don't really get to often talk to people who just want to talk bio. So people that I talk to are all talking rad stuff. I'm like, no, let's talk more
Yeah.
about bio.
It was really, yeah, I mean, when I started at DIA, I was the first biologist that they had to develop that program there, which was very surprising to me. They'd had chemical and rad nuke detection and characterization efforts going on for a long time, but they had done so little in bio. And the thing is bio is hard, because it's dual use, because it's natural, because it's everywhere, it's hard. And so it is, people tend to shy away from the hard problems. And I think that's been, a great deficit for biodefense, is that it's just a very hard problem. And that's why we need to leverage all the other research that's going on in the public domain as well.
So, any last questions? I don't want to keep you any longer. And this has been really great. So I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. I
JD,
appreciate the invitation.
all right. Well, if there are no other questions, I did send you a couple emails for some follow-up things, but if there are no other questions, then I hope everybody has an amazing holiday season. It's crazy that we are already saying this, but it is. And today is December 6th, so our next webinar is going to be 2 months from tomorrow. So I hope to see everybody back here then. So Merry Christmas,
All
Happy
right.
New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Happy everything.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Bye, have a great night.
Bye-bye.